It started as a quiet evening at a small-town diner, but everything changed when a frantic SOS signal came from a deaf black girl in need. She waved desperately, her eyes pleading for help. But the man nearest to her, a disgruntled customer, coldly ignored her, muttering under his breath. The tension in the room grew thick as the girl's silent call for help went unanswered, and others hesitated to step in. Then, from the corner of the room, a grizzled veteran rose from his seat. His calm demeanor didn't reveal much, but the fire in his eyes said he had seen injustice before, and he wasn't about to let it slide this time. What happened next left the entire diner stunned and taught everyone a lesson they'd never forget. Stay tuned to see how this extraordinary story unfolded and why this veteran's response still has people talking today. The room fell silent as the veteran, a man in his late 60s with a weathered face and an air of quiet authority, walked toward the girl. She clutched a small notebook, hurriedly scribbling something down as tears welled in her eyes. It was clear she was in distress, but her inability to speak only seemed to frustrate the man who had ignored her. He scoffed, shaking his head, and muttered something under his breath about wasting time. The veteran knelt beside her, his calm presence a stark contrast to the tension in the room. "What's going on?" he asked gently, making sure she could see his lips. She pointed to the notebook, where she had written a single word: "*help*". Meanwhile, the man who had brushed her off was still at his table, visibly annoyed. Others in the diner whispered amongst themselves, unsure of what was happening but unwilling to act. What had she seen? Or was she running from something? The air buzzed with unspoken questions, and the veteran's next move was about to change everything. The veteran read the word *help* on the notebook, his eyes narrowing with quiet concern. He turned to the girl and gently asked, "Are you in danger?" She nodded quickly, glancing nervously toward the window as if expecting someone or something to appear. Her hands trembled as she flipped the page and wrote more, her handwriting shaky but urgent. "*He's following me*." The veteran's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "Who's following you?" he asked, but before she could respond, the bell above the diner door jingled. A tall man in a dark coat stepped inside, scanning the room with sharp, calculating eyes. The girl froze, shrinking in her seat, and the veteran instinctively shifted his body to shield her. The man's gaze locked onto them, and for a moment, the tension was unbearable. Was this the person she was running from? Meanwhile, the diner patrons grew uneasy, their murmurs growing louder. The man who had ignored her earlier rolled his eyes and muttered, "This is ridiculous." But something about the newcomer's presence made others lower their voices. The veteran stood slowly, his years of training kicking in as he prepared for whatever was about to unfold. The air was thick with uncertainty, and no one knew what would happen next. The man in the dark coat took slow, deliberate steps into the diner, his eyes scanning each face as if searching for someone. The girl gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white, trying to make herself smaller behind the veteran. Her fear was palpable, and the veteran could feel it in the way she tried to stifle her shaking. The man's gaze finally settled on them. "You," he said, his voice low but commanding. The entire diner fell silent, and it felt like time itself had stopped. The veteran squared his shoulders and stood tall, his calm demeanor now tinged with quiet defiance. "She's not going anywhere with you," he said firmly, his voice carrying across the room. The man smirked, his confidence unsettling. "You don't know what you're getting yourself into, old man." At that moment, the diner doors swung open again, and 2 police officers entered, scanning the scene. Relief flickered across the girl's face, but before anyone could react, the man in the coat made a sudden move toward her. The veteran stepped forward, positioning himself as a shield, his instincts sharp as a knife. The officers shouted commands, the girl clutched her notebook tightly, and the diner erupted into chaos. All eyes were on the man, the veteran, and the girl. The tension had reached its breaking point, and everyone was bracing for what was about to happen next. As the officers raised their hands, commanding everyone to stay calm, the man in the coat suddenly reached into his jacket. The room froze, every breath held in anticipation. The veteran didn't flinch, his eyes locked on the man's every move. But instead of a weapon, the man pulled out a badge. "Private investigator," he announced, flashing it briefly before tucking it away. "She's a runaway. I've been hired to bring her back." The girl's face crumpled as she shook her head violently, frantically writing in her notebook. "Asterisk, he's lying. Asterisk," she scribbled, shoving the page toward the veteran. The officers hesitated, unsure of who to believe. The investigator's tone turned colder. "She's been avoiding her guardian for weeks. They're worried sick about her." But something didn't add up. The veteran noticed the man's hand still lingering near his coat pocket, and his instincts screamed that this wasn't what it seemed. If she's safe with her guardian, why's she so scared? The veteran asked sharply, his voice cutting through the tension. The girl scribbled again, flipping the page. "Asterisk is not with my family." Asterisk, she underlined the words, her tears smudging the ink. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, now doubting the man's story. Before they could press him further, the investigator turned toward the officers, his voice sharp. "Do your job and step aside. This has nothing to do with you or him." But the veteran stood firm, blocking the man's path. The girl clutched his arm, trembling, and whispered the only word she could manage: "Please." The stakes had never been higher, and the truth felt closer than ever, but so did the danger. The tension in the diner was unbearable as the veteran refused to move, his steady gaze locked on the so-called investigator. "If she's coming with you, you'll need to prove who you are," the veteran said firmly. The officers nodded in agreement, their hands still hovering near their belts. The man's confident smirk faltered, just for a second, but enough for the veteran to notice. The girl, still gripping her notebook, scribbled something else and held it up for the officers to see. Asterisk, check the news. Asterisk, her wide, desperate eyes pleaded with them to act. One of the officers quickly pulled out a phone, searching for information. Meanwhile, the man in the coat shifted uneasily, his hand inching toward his pocket again. Before anyone could react, the veteran moved first, grabbing the man's wrist in a firm grip. A concealed weapon slipped from his jacket and clattered to the floor, shocking everyone in the room. The officer nearest to them quickly cuffed the man, who now shouted in protest, his earlier confidence gone. The officer with the phone stepped forward, his face pale. "She's right," he said. "There's a statewide alert. This man's been posing as a private investigator to abduct minors." Gasps rippled through the diner as the truth finally came to light. The girl broke down in tears, clutching the veteran's arm. He knelt beside her, his voice soft but steady. "You're safe now," he said. But just as relief began to settle over the room, the girl wrote one last message. Asterisk, he's not alone. Asterisk. The officers exchanged tense looks, their radios crackling to life. Outside, the faint sound of screeching tires grew louder. The veteran stood, his eyes narrowing toward the window. The battle wasn't over yet. The screeching tires came to a halt outside the diner as more police cars arrived, their lights flashing red and blue. Officers swarmed the area, quickly detaining 2 other men waiting in a van nearby. The girl clung to the veteran's side, her relief finally breaking through her fear. The lead officer approached her, speaking gently. "We'll contact your family. You're safe now." The girl nodded, her tears flowing freely as she mouthed, "Thank you." The veteran watched quietly as the officers secured the scene. One turned to him and said, "You may have just saved her life." He gave a small nod, his expression unreadable, but his actions had spoken volumes. As the girl was escorted to safety, she looked back at the veteran, her gratitude shining through her tired eyes. The diner returned to normal, but for those who witnessed the events that night, it was a story they'd never forget, a reminder that stepping up for someone in need can change everything.